Thank you guys so much for coming and for listening in. I'm Andy. I'm going to be representing Pano Education today. I created this company 3 years ago because I really felt like in Taiwan there weren't as many resources as I had growing up in the United States. And so to that end, we've assembled a team to help with our counseling. And so this is just a small sample of some of our resources here in Taiwan. We have some area experts. So for example, Vernon, he actually graduated, he grew up in Taiwan, went to Yale for undergrad, and now he's studying law. So for a lot of our students who are interested in what maybe a legal career might look like, or what that path might look like, we can introduce Vernon to them. We also have a lot of full-time staff. We probably have the biggest full-time staff of college grads from like top US universities in Taiwan. So we have 6 full-time counselors and instructors. That one's me. We have Azusa, we have Peggy, who some of you guys have met before, and quite a few of those. And then in the last year or so, we started getting a lot more US professors to help out as well. So one of the major things, especially for our STEM students, for our business students, is we want to be able to do research, right? We want to be able to learn at college level, so we get US professors to come help us out as well. Now, for our team, the general philosophy that we built the company on is this idea of applying sideways. Do you guys know what applying sideways refers to? Have you guys heard of this term before? So this is a term that was actually coined by the MIT admissions office. The idea is that for a lot of kids, a lot of parents, we think about college apps. You think, all right, I need to take 5 APs. I need to have sport. I need to be good at violin. I need to go volunteer as well, right? And you have like this checklist of things that you want to do. But really, we don't think that's the right way to approach college admissions because ultimately there is nothing you can do to guarantee admission to a top US university. The MIT admissions office gives an example. They said there's one student who built a nuclear reactor in his garage, just a small one, hopefully not too dangerous, but he got rejected by MIT. Right? And the reason, they didn't give a reason, but some people might say, oh, well, maybe it is kind of dangerous. Like, do they really want someone making nuclear reactors on campus? But the point is, there's nothing you can do to guarantee it. So instead of trying to just focusing on admissions, why don't we focus on helping the student grow? Why don't we help them become more capable people and better students? And so as a side effect, you get into college, right? And to that end, we try to help students find their passion, pursue their passion, grow along the way. And so no matter what university you go to, you'll be able to succeed and do well, and hopefully have a good career after. College really isn't the end of the road, right? So in terms of showing that growth that students have, I'm going to talk a little bit about just like the application as well. So you guys can look forward to that. Obviously for middle school students, none of these are going to be immediately applicable, but something we want to prepare towards. Now the first thing is going to be academics, right? So this will be your school GPA, your school GPA, how hard are the classes you're taking, did you take any college courses while you're in high school, everything like that. 2 is standardized tests. Now, standardized testing is always changing. I'm sure you guys have heard about the SAT essays, test optional, SAT 2 is being canceled. For you guys right now, we don't really know what the situation is going to be like in 2 or 3 years. I know UC says they're going to make their own test as well. So we'll see what happens with that. But there's probably definitely going to be some sort of standardized testing, right? So with that, that's how they really compare students in Taiwan with students in America, with students in Korea, and all over the world. Then we have our extracurriculars. The extracurriculars is actually like my favorite part of the application. I think this is really where students get to show off what makes them unique and what makes them who they are, right? Extracurricular is something that I think you guys can all start thinking about now as well. When we have some like examples of students in high school getting into great universities. You'll see that a lot of their activities don't start in 11th grade. They don't start in 10th grade. The foundations are built actually in middle school, right? And so extracurricular is something to think about now. In general, when you apply for US universities, you need 10 activities. So the Common App gives you room for 10 activities. You don't have to fill them all in, right? But if we're talking about the most competitive schools, then you probably want to. But that doesn't just mean school clubs, right? That could be like summer programs. That could be volunteer trips. All of that can count. For those activities, most of them will have to start 9th grade and onwards, right? But as I said, right now we want to build foundations. The letters of rec, yeah.
Are you saying 10 activities in 4 years?
Yeah, 10 activities across the 4 years. Not 10 activities all at once. So a little bit better. And letters of recommendation, right? So from your teachers, from the grade principal, who will write an excellent letter of rec, and this could come from other people as well, right? And this can tie into some of your extracurriculars. So to give an example, one of our teachers, Vernon, the student who got into Yale from Taiwan, one of his letters of rec came from his internship class, right? So he did an internship at a law firm, 11th grade summer, and then his boss, the owner of the firm, was also a Yale grad, a Yale alumni. And so he wrote a letter of rec saying, this is the most talented high schooler I've ever seen, all of that. So letters of rec can come from a lot of places. But usually for that, we're looking at your 11th grade teacher and some of your older experiences. And then even farther down the road, you have to start writing your essays. Now, essays is something we can't directly prepare for yet, but how good of an essay you write honestly depends a lot on your experiences as well as your English writing ability, right? And so those are things that we can start preparing for. For a lot of schools, the essays, I think, are becoming more and more important, right? Like UCs this year, they didn't look at your SATs at all. And so what were they looking at? A big part of it would have been your essays. And then lastly, some schools will have interviews, right? With interviews, one thing we've noticed, I think it's probably less of an issue for Morrison students, but one thing we've noticed is if your spoken English isn't good enough, it hurts you a lot on the interviews. But I think that's probably not as much of an issue here. So generally speaking, these are the 6 things. Now, what do the colleges actually want to see from these 6 aspects, right? So sorry, some of it's not very clear, but there's basically about 13 different factors that colleges will look at. Right? So we have our academic stuff here and our non-academic things down bottom. And for each of these, they're going to rank how important it is based on the top. So very important, important, considered, or not considered at all. And every university will be a little bit different, but generally speaking, these are the factors that they look at. Let me just go down the list real quick. So the first one is rigor of secondary school record. What that means is, are you challenging yourself, right? Are you taking the hardest classes possible at school? What that also means is they're comparing you with the classes your school offers, not necessarily everyone else in the world. So at my high school, I think we offered like 20 APs or something, right? So it was actually pretty standard to take maybe like 11 APs, which is a crazy amount, right? But if your school doesn't offer as much, you don't have to try to get that 11. My roommate at Yale, at his school, they offered 1 AP, right? He took that 1 AP and that was fine. Or at some schools in Taiwan that have no APs, right? Then the university aren't expecting you to take those, right? If your school doesn't offer. So you want to push yourself within the classes that your school has. On that note, though, you also don't want to push yourself too hard because they also care about your class rank and your GPA, right? So it's definitely a balancing act in terms of, how hard are you challenge yourself and how well you can do in those classes. On that note, so going back to this whole idea of finding your passion, that's also one reason why we don't recommend you just take APs for the sake of it. You should pick classes that you're actually passionate about and you care about and are going to be relevant to your major, because you're also more likely to do better on those APs, right? So a student came up to me once, he said, I want to study computer science, but I think I should take AP literature. I was like, well, that's going to take a lot of time. You're probably going to get a low score, and it's just not relevant, so why do it? Another factor we're going to look at is your standardized test scores right here, essays and recommendations. We talked a little bit about those already. Non-academic, we have our interview. And then here we have extracurricular activities, talent, ability, character, and personal qualities. And then volunteer work and work experience. All of those are actually kind of just extracurriculars, right? That's where you show your character, that's where you show your talent. So there's about 5 different categories that are kind of related to your resume and your extracurricular activities. And in terms of all of those things, different schools will care about them to varying degrees. And then there's a lot of other factors that we can't really affect at this point, right? We have things where it's like state residency. Do you have legacy? Are your parents alumni? all of those will factor in as well. But those you can't really control. Now, one interesting thing about Berkeley is for talent ability, right? So let's say, do you play violin? Are you a talented athlete? Berkeley actually says they don't even look at that. Right? So UC Berkeley doesn't care at all if you have talent. They care a lot more about the academics. But then we have another school like NYU, right? NYU actually cares a lot about talent ability, right? So if you're really talented at violin, really talented at sports, maybe a school like NYU would be a slightly better fit. Right? So all schools are going to be a little bit different, but they generally look at about like these 13 or so factors. Okay. So I've talked a lot about extracurriculars and how important they are, but like what actually makes them meaningful? What makes them impactful for our college apps? Usually we look at these three factors. Right? The best activities will have all three of these. Great activities will have two, and activities that are worth doing will have at least one. So the first one is consistency. Consistency in two ways. Right? One is consistent with what you want to study in the future. Right? So if you say your major is computer science, you should probably do some activities that are computer science related. Right? Of course, that might change in the future, but generally you want to show interest in that area already. The biggest problem we see with that is sometimes students will say, I think it's easier to get in as a Russian literature major. So I'm going to choose Russian literature as my major. But then if all of their activities have nothing to do with Russian literature, then that's no good. Right? So you want to make sure your activities are at least somewhat consistent. And you want to make sure you do them for a long time. Right? Colleges don't want to see you suddenly start 10 different activities 12th grade because you're like, oh no, college apps are coming. Right? So by doing activities for a longer period of time, you show that passion that you have, and you show that you're persistent and you have definite interest. Something impactful, right? Impact. This goes farther than just being like an officer at a club, right? Actually, just being president of a club might not mean that much. At a lot of schools, the number of clubs is like half the number of students, right? So everyone's a club president or everyone's an officer. Instead, impact is about what do you actually do, right? So let's say the difference between a club president who doesn't change anything and maybe has like one event a year versus a club president who raises like 100,000 NTD for charity. That makes a big difference. Or if we talk about internships, right? Let's say you get through some connections, right? You get your student an internship at Google, really impressive company. But what are they doing at Google, right? Are they just like getting coffee for people? Are they just watching other people work? That's not impactful, right? And actually, that won't help your app that much. But let's say you go to a smaller company, but you make a big difference, right? You go manage their Instagram and you get them to 5 times their followers in 6 months. That's actually a lot more impressive. So you want to be impactful. And then uniqueness. For most colleges now, the number of applicants has gone pretty crazy, right? And for most of them, if we look at the academics, a lot of them are probably comparing you with people who are similar academics, right? SAT score is roughly the same, GPA roughly the same. So they want students that are a little bit different, that add more diversity, right? To give you guys an example, so Harvard maybe gets around 50,000 applicants a year, right? Of those 50,000, about 10,000 have the same GPA and SAT scores. And from those 10,000, they need to pick 1,000, right? So just having the academics is sort of gets you to be considered, but how do you stand out, right? How do you show that you're different? So that's uniqueness. So an example of something really unique could be, one of our students this year, he had like this kind of weird hobby. I shouldn't say weird, interesting hobby. He likes to take fish and then he dyes them different colors using chemicals. So something called diaphanized specimen. If you guys go to the Taoyuan Aquarium X Park, they have an exhibit there as well, right? It's like these fish skeletons. It's actually very pretty. And so for that, like initially that would never show up on his college app, right? Because it's not an official club or anything. But we thought that was really interesting. And so we decided to help him host like an art exhibit to display that. And that was able to show off something that's a little bit different about him. So having something unique is also important. Okay? And so to give you guys some idea about how to find these activities that have all three, because that can actually be pretty difficult. The first thing I want to say is you don't have to immediately start with an activity that has all three factors, right? So, for example, let's say you do Model United Nations. I actually don't think Model United Nations is an amazing activity. Well, it's great for the student growth, but for college apps, too many kids do Model United Nations. Let's say you start with consistency, though. You've done Model United Nations for maybe 3 years, right? And now you're ready to take it to the next level. How can we add impact, right? Okay, maybe you become club president of Model United Nations and you increase recruitment by 50%, and you host the first MUN conference at your school. Okay, you have impact. Now, how do you become unique, right? One of our students this year, because of COVID, he hosted the first ever virtual Model United Nations across 8 different countries, right? And so that's a little bit more unique now. So for whatever activity you start with, whatever activities you guys build foundations for now in middle school, eventually you can find ways to grow them and make them a little bit more meaningful. Speaking of meaningful activities, generally speaking, here are a few different categories for what to consider, right? So learning, that's probably the most important for middle school students right now. So this could be online and offline courses, right? It could be edX, Coursera. It could be going to even some universities in Taiwan that offer a lot of enrichment courses. So starting to build those skills. Life skills, right? Life skills are always important, especially if in the future you want to work at an internship of some sort. You want to be able to do a good job. Research is not as relevant for middle school students. It's probably not possible to do real research in middle school. However, you start building the foundations for doing research in the future. When I applied to university, I applied as a biology major. I wanted to be a doctor. Changed my mind later. I realized I was scared of blood, so that wasn't going to work. But my first year doing research was actually in 9th grade. So 9th grade summer, I did a pretty easy research program at a local university. 10th grade summer, I did a much more difficult research project at a US military base. And my 11th grade summer, I did a research project at the Government Research Center, and that project ended up being about stem cells and sort of stuff like that. And with that, I was able to publish in Nature magazine, which is one of the biggest international science magazines, and I won a science fair, right? But that process of building up to the research is really difficult, right? It took 3 years to get to a research lab that was very reputable. But even before 9th grade, right, I did science camps before. I learned basic research skills so that I could even get that first one. Right? So that's definitely a long process, something to consider. Now service, I think community service and volunteering, super, super important. Definitely an area that helps students grow as people a lot. And some schools care a lot about community service. For Yale, for example, community service is one of the things that they care the most about. Right? One of the major parts of my application was I did 700 hours of community service over my high school career. Right? So that's something to really think about. And ideally, I think for service and volunteering, the consistency matters a little bit more as well. Right? You don't want to be serving, it's not necessarily bad to serve different groups of people, but if you show that you really care about one particular group of people, it's a little bit better. For our younger students, we have them start brainstorming, what are some issues in the world you care about? For example, a student says they're interested in helping get water to these underprivileged communities that don't have clean water, right? Then we can sort of shape our volunteering, our community around that issue to show that something that's a little bit deeper than, let's just say, it really just proves to colleges that you're not doing it for college, right? Whereas if you do a wide array of community service, it kind of looks more like you're doing a checklist. And lastly, work. This could be our part-time jobs, could be our internships, anything like that. Okay. Now, I hope you guys can see this, but this is a sample resume from a senior who has a very competitive list of extracurriculars. I wanted to go through some of these with you guys. Now, in terms of awards and honors, he ranked 8th nationally for the Physics Olympiad. Really difficult to do, right? And that's definitely something that you can't do just off the cuff, right? You can't decide in 11th grade, I'm going to take the physics Olympiad. Right? That's something he's been preparing for 5-6 years, where even in middle school he had done a ton of physics camps. Right? And so physics Olympiad, very impressive to qualify for that, but you got to prepare early. Here, for some of his interests, right, he's done calligraphy since grade 2, also won multiple competitions for that. Also something you can't just decide to suddenly do. Dance, he also danced for about 4 years. Right? And so these two things make him a little bit different from the average physics major, right, or the average science major. Not as many of them are willing to do calligraphy and dance, and the fact that he's been doing it for a long time makes his application a little bit different. Then up here we have some of his other extracurriculars. One of the major ones was he made his own cell phone, mobile app. He made a mobile app, and it has a web app, and he applied to a startup accelerator. So it's his own startup company. It was the biggest startup accelerator in Asia, and he was able to present in front of 8,000 people his idea for this startup. And what it did was, if you take a video of yourself dancing, it would use machine learning to tell you which moves are you doing incorrectly and how do you fix them. Right? So that tied in well with some of his interests down below with the dance. Right? But to do that, right, once again, to be good enough at coding and all that, in order to do that, first of all, he needed to have a lot of life skills. Right? He needed to be able to be capable of running a startup. And 2, he had to learn computer science from a very young age as well. Right? So that also took 4 or 5 years of build-up to get to that activity. Right? So basically everything here, it took him a very long time to get the skills necessary to finally show them off in high school. Okay? I want to talk briefly also about outside the US, because I know not everyone is necessarily going to the United States. Now, for the US, definitely they care more about extracurriculars than other countries. So for example, the UK, if you're going to apply to the UK, you have a personal statement of 1,000 to 4,000 characters, where you really just detail everything you've done. Right? You say, in 9th grade I did this, 10th grade I did this. And then it's more focused on academics. Right? They care a lot more about your test scores, your grades, than anything else. Now, for UK schools, there are also some separate tests you might have to take. Right? So, for example, if you want to go study medicine, you might have to take the BMAT. And that score is going to factor in a lot for your application. And then lastly, you also want to start preparing early for the UK because they might have specific AP requirements for you to take. Right? So for different programs, you might say you must take AP Calc or you must take AP Physics. And so that's something to prepare early for. And then for Australian universities, these are generally a little bit more simple to apply to. They also mostly focus on academics. And they have a few different application timelines. And so for Australian University, I would say you probably just want to focus on your academic grades and your test scores, and it should be okay. And if your test scores aren't quite there yet, they have a variety of different programs as well that they call foundation programs, where you can go to the university, first brush up on your English before joining the university. And I put this there, but Canadian schools are kind of similar to the US in their application. They're a little bit more focused on academics still. Okay? So that's just a general outline of that. If you guys have any questions about these, I'll be happy to answer afterwards. Now with all these universities, we've had a lot of success getting into basically all the top schools, both in the US and internationally. I'm not going to talk about these for too long, just go through that. But I think what's really interesting now is or the question I think is probably on most of your minds, okay, that's all in high school, right? But what can you do now to actually prepare for all of that? So there's a few different things. First off, I do think English foundations are really important. I think this is really at the core of everything, right? So first off, I think public speaking is something that's definitely worth working on now, right? Not just for college apps, but also when you go to college. In the States, a lot of it's seminar style. A lot of it's there's a lot of interaction between the student and the professor. I actually wish I worked more on my public speaking earlier, because when I went to college, I was kind of shy, right? I never asked questions, and I think I lost a lot of educational opportunities because of that. So starting public speaking early is really important. And this is going to help you with your interviews in the future as well and any leadership opportunities you have. So public speaking, you could try some debate camps, you can try maybe some junior MUN stuff, right, just to get used to talking. And then reading comprehension, this is mostly for the sake of the SAT and standardized tests, right? We see a lot of our high school students, even those who are like pretty fluent in English, struggle with the reading section of the SAT. And part of it is because they hadn't started working on this early enough. Do you guys know the average SAT score in the United States, actually? It's like 1,080 out of 1,600, right? So it's actually not super high. And one misconception I hear a lot is they think the SAT is a like English test, right? If you're just good at English, you'll be fine. But it's not just that. They test very specific skills. And so being able to start reading comprehension early is going to help a lot. Actually, like debate will help with your reading comprehension as well, because it helps you better figure out what the author's argument is. So even now, right, you want to start setting weekly reading goals, getting students into a habit for reading, and sort of like building that interest. And the books don't have to be like literature, right? They don't have to be like the famous books of old, because a lot of those are pretty boring, to be honest. I think it's more important to build their interest in reading. Right? There's a lot of great classes in high school and middle school, a lot of great English classes. But if the student doesn't care about the book, if they're not enjoying the reading process, they don't get as much out of it. So that's something to start building early. Find some books that might be interesting, might be fun, and that'll help a lot. And then lastly, this is going to be the essay writing. Writing skills are some of the hardest to come by in terms of English foundations. So getting them used to writing research papers, writing argumentative essays, even working on grammar a little bit, right, will go a long way to helping them in the future. Right, ultimately, in high school, you have a lot of courses, you have a lot of work. Having good English skills will help you with all of those courses, right? So that's something to work on. And then exploration, right? So first off, you want to explore different academic areas, right? At least have the student know if they're more interested in STEM or humanities, and then what aspect of that. What this could be is doing online classes, edX, Coursera, pre-college programs. And during the summer, you also want to explore as well. Right? There's a lot of camps out there. And honestly, for middle school students, I don't want to say you should spend the entire summer studying, because that's a little bit sad, right? They're still young. But you want to take at least a few weeks of the summer to help them get interested, right? So some students will have an inkling about what they like I think I kind of like science, or I think I kind of like history, but you don't really know unless you explore it, and so we would definitely encourage that. The other thing we want to do is talent development, right? This goes a little bit with the academic areas as well. But talent, in terms of music or sports, it takes a long time to develop, right? We don't want the student to show up 11th grade and just join junior varsity and not really contribute, right? That's not really going to help your college apps. So from just trying different instruments and sports to really pushing and trying to get to a competitive level, I think that's all really good too. For me personally, in high school, I've been pretty well known for volleyball. I was varsity captain for 2 years. We won state championships. But prior to that, I was actually supposed to be a swimmer, right? So I swam for a while, realized that I wasn't going to make it as a swimmer. They had practice at 5 a.m., and I can't do that. But I was able to explore volleyball earlier as well, and because I had these options, I was able to find the best fit for me later. So whether it's music, art, or sports, definitely worth exploring and trying different things. And even if maybe you don't think you can be best in the nation, there's still ways to use that talent to help your college apps, right? So a couple different ways. For example, I tried painting before. I don't look like an artist, I'm not really an artist, but I was able to win a national level art award, right? Because it's not a very popular competition. Right? It was the National Duck Stamp Contest. You paint a picture of a duck, and the winners get the picture made into a stamp. Not very exciting. I spent a whole year on that painting, but that's still something that can show consistency in my application, right? Because I've done art for 4 years. Another way is through connecting sports or whatever with other parts, right? So as a volleyball captain, I wasn't nationally recruited and anything. I wasn't good enough for D1. But I did host a lot of volleyball tournaments, right? I host these tournaments to raise money for charity, and that helped with my community service, right? So just by developing these talents, even if you're not best in a nation, you can still have it be like a great, great positive on your resume. And then career exploration might be a little bit early, but having them at least understand what different jobs are. I feel a little bit strongly about that because growing up, the only job I ever heard of was like doctor. And it wasn't until college I realized like there's no way I was going to be a doctor. So I think just generally being able to share with the student a little bit about what different jobs entail and see if they have an interest in that, that could be really good too. And then you also want to prepare for high school, right? High school is a lot of work. Principal just telling me about how the 12th graders were, really like cramming all this coursework and struggling a little bit now. But you want to prepare early, right? So where even if it's beyond English, right? If you want to take some extra math classes now, so it's a little bit easier than if you just jumped in, right in for high school. It could be computer science, right? Coding takes a while to develop that skill. So for all of that stuff, you want to start really early as well. And then I kind of repeated talent development and career exploration as well, because I also think that's kind of relevant for your high school preparation, right? But really, I think the academics, you want to make sure that they're not struggling in high school, and getting a head start can be helpful. Right? So I think we still have some time. So I did want to talk about a few more case studies. I showed you guys one resume before, but here are some of our students from even just this year, from our early admissions. The regular admissions aren't out yet, but I want to share some of these stories. So the first student is a Taipei American School student. He ended up applying as a computer science major. Here we have his GPAs. One thing I want to point out is his senior year GPA, very, very high, 4.8. So this is freshman, sophomore, junior, and a senior year GPAs. 4.8 is insanely high. But we'll notice that his GPA wasn't always that high, right? 3.93 is actually a fairly, it's not a bad GPA, but it's not 4.8, right? And part of it is he said he really wasn't ready for that high school workload at first. He spent a lot of time catching up. But that's okay for colleges, right? It's okay to have this trend where you get better and better, right? It's the growth that matters. He has very high test scores as well, which helps supplement his slightly lower freshman year and sophomore year GPA. In terms of his activities, so he was a swimmer. So one thing that helped a lot with that talent is he went through the recruitment process, actually, as a swimmer. So in terms of recruitment, if you guys are thinking about it, usually for Taiwanese students, individual sports will be easier for recruitment, right? So we're talking about like soccer, basketball, very hard to get recruited. We've had students do it before, but usually you might have to move to the States and go to like IMG Academy or something, right? But individual sports, swimming, golf, right, fencing, things like that, it's a little bit easier to get recruited for. That's something you can work towards, and it'll happen in 11th grade. Okay? So for swimming, he was sort of recruited by Caltech. Caltech doesn't guarantee admission, but their coach will write a letter of recommendation for you, saying you're actually pretty good at this sport. Beyond that, he was computer science club president. So this internship is interesting. At first, he thought he was going to be a chem major, so he got that internship at the synthetic rubber company. He ended up realizing he didn't like chemistry at all, and that's why he totally switched to computer science later. And that's something that was a little bit unfortunate, right? We wish he could have maybe done that exploration a little bit earlier, so he could have known he didn't like chemistry. Okay. And then the last 3 activities, we were able to arrange for him to sort of reinforce the computer science aspect of his application. Right? So the first one we did was actually the chemical engineering with the University of Washington lab. Right? So chemical engineering has a lot of interdisciplinary aspects with computer science and chemistry. So we're able to sort of smoothly transition from being a chem major to a computer science major. Then we also got him an internship at a startup working with COVID-19. So they're trying to track a lot of data and make that information more accessible. So you got computer science internship there. And then lastly, he was also TA for a Python class. right? So all of these things sort of work to build the computer science aspect of his application, right? And computer science, once again, is also something he's been doing since like ninth grade, since eighth grade, or else he would never have the ability to do any of those activities. Okay. Another student, this one from IBSH, right? Her actually GPA and SAT were a little bit low for NYU. Her 11th grade GPA, the 4.08 is actually a little bit higher now, but it used to be even like a 3.9, 3.8. And the SAT score of a 1380, definitely low for NYU, right? But we're really excited that she got in through early decision, right? With a $34,000 a year scholarship, which is really great. And so for her, one thing she had to do was emphasize her business sense, right? And that's something she didn't really have before. Starting out, we gave her this week summer business camp, right? Now this is just a summer camp where you learn basic business stuff. And that by itself is not necessarily that impressive, right? So beyond that, we had to make sure she showed off her leadership in business science in different ways as well. One unique thing about her is she's traveled a lot. She's lived in Nanjing and Tainan and then Hsinchu. And for each of these, she was able to be a member of the student council, right? So she was consistently showing that even though she was in different environments, she was trying to be a leader in all of these. And then for TEDx Youth, she was able to be the event manager. And then lastly, we got an internship at Fluv, which is a startup that helps you find pet sitters. So you just use an app. If you need a pet sitter, they show up at your house and takes care of them. Now, this internship was really interesting for two reasons. One, it was very much business related. She was a marketing intern. She hosted multiple events over the year and raised, I think, like 200,000 NT for pet shelters, for dog shelters. The other interesting thing is she's scared of dogs. She's terrified of any small animal, right? So this is like really weird that she would even do this internship, right? But she said that she felt like as a fear she wanted to challenge and get past, which is great. And that would be something that we wrote her essay about, was how despite being so scared of animals, at the end of the internship she was able to hold a dog and not like scream, right? So that's something that made her a little bit more unique, right? That story is not one that every student would be able to tell. Okay. And then lastly, the student went to Yanping. Pretty high stats. They don't really do GPA there, but 1510 on the SAT is pretty high, and pretty good SAT 2 scores. Okay. Oh, one unique thing about U Chicago is you have to apply early decision. If you don't do early decision, the chances are very low of getting in. So they only like early decision students. But for her, she had a lot of talent. She did a ton of art, a ton of calligraphy. She won national level competitions in calligraphy, photography, and art. So very talented. And that's something she worked on for a long time. And then she was also editor-in-chief of the school magazine, right? She needed really great English skills for that. So even though she went to Yanping, which is like a local school, she was able to work hard enough on her English to be able to become editor-in-chief. And because she wanted to study business, we needed to make sure she had something business-related in her final activity. And so we got her an internship at another startup called WordUp, right? And she managed her social media account. Their Instagram went from 500 followers to 50,000 followers. And that was something that ended up being very impressive to the U Chicago team. Because I think even a lot of professionals probably can't do that, right? So that's something that also made her a little bit more unique and showed consistency with her final application. So just want to share a little bit about what to expect for your kids and sort of what a really great resume and what activities should look like by the end of high school, and a little bit about the preparation you guys need to take. But yeah, I want to open things up for questions now. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
I had a question that goes about your services then. Is it that you are helping to make these different connections and find these different opportunities? How does that fit? It sounds great, but it's like, okay, well,
how does that actually work?
Right, how am I going to find an internship for my high schooler? So.
Yeah, so our youngest students that come to us are 7th grade, though we don't always recommend that. It's a little bit young. Generally speaking, for younger students, we start with the exploration. right? We find the summer programs and the online programs that would be the best fit for them, and we slowly help them find their passion in that sense, right? For our older students, that's when we really start bringing in all these other resources, where we say, this is the internship that is going to be the best fit. Maybe this is a professor you can do research with, and we also help them apply to competitive summer programs for high schoolers. For middle schoolers, the summer programs are probably not competitive. They're more for exploration, with a few exceptions. So if you have a student who's interested in math, there's some summer math programs that are very, very tough to get into, such as Awesome Math, which specializes in preparing you for the AMC, right? So for that application, that's something we help the students with as well. And generally speaking, we meet once every 2 weeks, so we can get caught up on what they've been up to, and sometimes really just like push them when needed. A lot of times you realize that you tell kids like, yeah, this is what you should do, and then 2 weeks later they don't do it, right? So we need to set milestones and make sure that they really follow through. But really, for every student, it's going to be a little bit different. It's pretty customized. I hope that kind of answered. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I guess that's about it. If you guys have individual questions you want to ask, feel free to come talk to me as well. Always happy to answer. Yeah.